Hello guys, this is Kaushik Kumar, HOD of Verbal at SRIRAM Law Academy. And I'm sure a lot of you who are watching this video today, some of you may have given CLAT recently, and some of you must be planning on giving CLAT next year. And those of you who have given CLAT must be really relieved that it's over for now, at least. And those of you who are planning to give it next year must be really, well, should have been eagerly watching how CLAT went this year, because that is going to give you a plan of action for how you're going to tackle it next year. Now, the reason why this year's CLAT was something which was completely different was firstly because I'm sure, as all of you are affected by it, the pandemic changed the complexion of CLAT completely, because it kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. A lot of students were so eager to just finish the exam. They were worried about how it was going to be conducted. A lot of external factors. So you should really be proud of yourselves for actually writing the exam at the end of it after all of this, if you had given CLAT until now. But there's another reason why this year's CLAT was so different and so radically different from how it has been before, and that is because of the new pattern. And yes, I'm sure a lot of you know what the new pattern is, but in this video, I would just like to highlight a few things you can learn from how CLAT was this year and how the new pattern will affect how you should approach the exam, because that is so very different from how it was before. So the first lesson as such that I would like to focus upon is that of the whole topic of current affairs, right? Now, this year's CLAT had a whole different approach to current affairs. Earlier, what you had was a question of how much you knew, how much you could memorize, and how much you could remember with regard to specific details on what happened all around the world and within the country. But this year, the focus was more about the why of things. So they did not care about whether you had the knowledge of very intricate details just for the sake of knowing it. So they wanted to test you on how well you understand what is going on in the whole world. So it was more about a question of understanding world politics, why few things happen, understanding what the reasons is that India does something like this, the US pursues a certain action. So all of this and the question as to why they do it and what is the fundamental basis for it, and all of these kinds of more analytical questions is what the current affairs section of this year's CLAT was focused upon. So they did not care about whether you knew something just for the sake of knowing it, but they wanted to test you on it, on how you will be able to answer these questions when asked about why certain country is doing this way, or why a certain country has a particular policy towards a certain subject matter. So all of this required you to not just know about certain things like, let's say, who's the Union Minister of Agriculture, or let's say, where was this forum conducted, which day is the International Diabetes Day, or etc., etc. So all of these kinds of random GK trivia is not the focus of CLAT anymore. So they started asking you questions about why a certain country is doing a certain policy change, or why they are behaving in this way, what their trade relations are between these two countries, etc., etc. So all of these things changes how you're going to approach current affairs as such when you're preparing for it. Now, this means that this doesn't change the fact that you still have to put in enough effort like you previously did, and you need to do it on a consistent basis. But your focus should be about how you're able to understand how the different pieces in the world work with regard to what their objectives are, what their ambitions are, and what their restrictions are, and how different players in the whole world interact with each other in the global sphere, not just with respect to politics, with sports, with arts, with media, with culture, everything, right? So it's more a question of all of that, a deeper understanding of these issues rather than surface level knowledge of what happened and what the name of a certain policy was, etc., etc., right? So this changes how you're going to approach it, in the sense that you're going to start focusing on how every single thing that you read in the newspaper fits in with the larger picture of what is happening in the world. So you're going to have to start relating it back to how every issue had begun, why a certain country is behaving in a certain way, and why this issue has not, say, this been resolved for how many ever years, or why has it suddenly come into prominence. So you got to start asking yourself so many more questions. So in this kind of a situation, you've got to spend a little more time than earlier in trying to read the newspapers, especially in the columns like the editorials, the opinions, like in very established newspapers like the Hindu or the Express, right? So you got to start spending a little more time in reading the editorial columns and reading the opinion columns to understand how these things work, rather than just picking up random trivia, random GK, like random bits and pieces of general knowledge from the newspaper itself. So that is how your approach should change, particularly for the current affairs section, because the whole point of view of the exam has changed and they are expecting something completely different from you as a student who's taking CLAT. So it's more, and this leads me on to the second lesson as such from this year's CLAT, and that is that of skill development. So it's no longer a question of a knowledge-based paper. It has turned into a completely skill-based paper wherein they're testing your skills on your reading skills, or your logical reasoning skills, or your critical analytical skills, and your mathematical skills as well. And even to an extent, now with the change in current affairs, there it's more about a question of how you're able to filter out information and like understand and analytically and critically evaluate what you're reading on a day-to-day basis. So those kinds of skills as well are being tested throughout CLAT in almost every single section. So your approach as such to this paper should completely change, in the sense that, like I've told you in previous videos, skills are not something which you can learn, right? Skills are something which are developed, and these are developed over time by consistently practicing them, by consistently trying and improving it, by finessing the most difficult aspects that you find are something that you struggle with, right? So it's about identifying what you are good at, what you are not good at, and then trying to like improve yourself in the things that you are not so good at, to even out the playing field, so that you're able to do well across the paper and not just in particular sections of the paper, right? So it's all a question about trying to improve these skills over a period of time. And that is where time will play an essential factor. Because if you start now for next year's CLAT, you have more than adequate time to be able to develop all these skills. But it's just a matter of adopting a particularly consistent and disciplined approach towards this to be able to improve these skills to a level where you will be able to crack CLAT and get into one of the top NLUs in the country, right? So that is something which you will need to keep in mind, that it's no longer a question of how much you know. It's more about a question of how well you're able to adapt yourself to certain situations and be able to change your approach to different scenarios that are being presented to you, and adapt yourself to new information that is being presented to you in the CLAT paper itself. Because there are things which are going to surprise you. You cannot expect anything anymore, because it can be absolutely anything that you would have never ever expected before. And that is something which they're testing you on how well you are able to deal with such a situation. And that is why the whole nature of CLAT as such has changed this year. And it's very, very important to adapt your approach as well, because otherwise you're going to be falling behind, right? So the next lesson as such which we need to focus on is that of reading skills, right? So reading skills are going to be immense in how well you will be able to do in CLAT or not. And I'm sure a lot of emphasis has already been like put before as well for CLAT exam previously, right? But it's gotten even more important, because now in CLAT you're expected to read across 15 passages, right? 15 passages within the amount of time that you've been set out for CLAT, right? And in those 15 passages, you're going to be faced with a lot of complex passages which have differently, weirdly like organized passage structures. You're going to come across a lot of difficult vocabulary, and you're going to come across subject matters which you would have never ever read anything about before, right? So all of this points to the fact that it's going to be a really difficult time wherein you're going to be reading across 15 passages of varying difficulty and varying subject matters. And that is where you should be able to improve on three things. That is reading stamina, reading speed, and preventing reading fatigue, right? So reading speed is something which I'm sure a lot of people have spoken about before, and I'm sure a lot of you have placed emphasis on it, but it's even more important now, because it's not just about finishing reading a passage. It's also about being able to understand exactly what you've read, because these reading comprehension questions are not just going to ask you to identify something, just pick it out from the passage. They're going to ask you to critically analyze and evaluate what is already given to you in front of you, right? So this is something wherein your ability to be able to grasp information and understand that information very quickly is going to come in very, very handy. And that is where you need to be able to increase your reading speed, right? So I'm not trying to tell you that there needs to be a specific number of words that you need to read in a minute. There's not a specific number of passages that you need to read within a particular amount of time, because I know a lot of people have different reading speeds, and some people will be faster than the others, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot improve on your already existing skills, because you do have the time. And that is why this video is extremely important at this juncture, because you have enough time to be able to improve your skills to a level where you will be able to crack CLAT in a great way and improve your skills accordingly for reaching that dream of yours, right? And reading endurance is again something which you need to focus on, because being able to read passages effectively for a short period of time is something which everybody can do. If you can read for say 5 to 10 minutes and be able to grasp everything that is inside the passage very well, and that's good, that's a great thing to do, but you're expected to do that across 15 passages. And that is something which needs a lot of practice. And that is where you should not feel fatigued when you're reading a lot, right? And that is where we tell you that your approach to this kind of developing your reading skills should not be to look at it as a chore. Do not look at it as a task. Do not look at it as something which you're obligated to do. Try and enjoy it more and more, and start off by reading more and more things that interest you, because that is how you develop your motivation first, right? To start off by reading a lot of things, like in your newspapers, in your articles, in your different journals that you can come across, any online media source where you read a lot of paragraphs. So try picking out things that you enjoy reading first, because that is how you can try and increase the amount of reading you can get done per day. And once you get to that level, you can then move on to more and more things which may not be something which you really enjoy reading, right? So that's the level of difficulty that you can approach it from, starting with an easy one where you start reading things that you personally like, and then moving on to the more complex and the more, say, boring reading passages as such, right? Because all of this needs to be done, because if at the end of say 10 at the end of 10 different passages, you are fatigued and you can't read anymore, and if you're not able to grasp what is given in the passages anymore, then pretty much like your exam ends there, because you will not be able to process that information, and you will not be able to do well in all of the questions that are being asked. Because like I told you, they have changed the nature of the exam, and considering it's a skill-based exam, it's none of the marks are going to be easy for you to get, especially with comprehension passages for you to read, right? So this is about reading skills as such. Now, the next thing which I'm sure a lot of you are dreading, and I'm sure a lot of you are not very, very comfortable with, is that of quantitative techniques. And I understand that few people are gifted with it, and that's great, but some people are not really good at numbers, and that's not something to worry about. Now, I'll tell you why. Because firstly, the quantitative techniques and the level of math that is involved in CLAT are something which you did, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So this is something which you've already done and completed, and you're very, very familiar with, right? That is the level that they are expecting you. And the second thing is that it forms a it forms a relatively small part of the whole CLAT paper, right? But that doesn't mean that that's something which you can ignore, because for one reason, that's one of the sections where you could potentially score very high, right? And if you really practice very well consistently, these are principles and theories which are very, very like simple and easy to understand, that you can do really well as long as you put in the amount of time and effort that you need, right? And that is why we're telling you that even if out of the 100% of mathematic quantitative techniques questions, even if you're really good at it, then you could potentially get full 100% on it, and that will be a great addition and a great jump for you to get into the law school that you want. But even if you're not so comfortable with math, even then you will still be able to get at least 70 to 80% of the questions right, because that is the level that is presented there in CLAT, and that is all that they expect from you. And that is something which you can genuinely prepare for, especially with the amount of time that you have in your hand, right? So do not try to put yourself in the mental image of, okay, quant is something that is not going to work for me, and I'm going to skip it. So do not go into that mindset. Always think that quant is something which is achievable. It's something which can be done, right? And it's just a matter of doing something which you've already done before successfully, right? So always keep that in mind when you are doing it, and that's the approach you should take. Because if you can say get 70 or more than 80% of the questions right in quant, that is going to put you in a very, very good state to be able to do well in the other sections that you are a lot more comfortable with, right? And if you're good, if you feel you're good at quant, then that's something which you can score a full 100% of the marks in, and that's something which is going to put you in a very good stead to be able to do well in CLAT overall, right? So these are the general lessons that we have learned from CLAT. So I have told you why, I've told you every single different subject, every single different subject within CLAT itself and how you can change your approach to it. But like I've told you before, the whole nature of CLAT has changed. And that is particularly because of the new pattern, especially because they have started placing a lot more emphasis on skills and understanding rather than just having a lot of knowledge about a few things, which even if it's related to current affairs section, even if it's related to the logical reasoning or the legal reasoning or even math for that matter, right? So all of this points to the fact that you need to be able to change your approach and adapt yourself to the changing nature of CLAT, because if you don't, you're going to be left behind. And this is the exact time you need to be evaluating how you should approach the exam, because this is when you make your plan of action, because this is when you decide how you're going to approach it, how you're going to spread out your time over the course of, say, 8 months, the rest of the 8 months until CLAT next year, wherein you can prepare yourself in things, in subjects which you believe are something which you can definitely improve on, and hone your skills in something which you know you're already good at, right? So this is where you make your plan of action, and this is where you need to keep in mind all of these things which I've just spoken about in this video. And always remember that try and adapt yourself constantly, because if not, you are going to fall behind, right? So for more of my such tactics and my classes, please do log on to www.sriramlawacademy.com. And if you did enjoy this video, please like it and subscribe to this channel for more such content. And with that, this is me, Kaushik, signing off.